This is Moderate Rebels. I'm Ben Norton. Still, we're all in quarantine. Max Blumenthal, my co-host, is in Washington, D.C. And today we're joined by the Brazilian journalist Nathália Urban, who is based in Scotland and is from Brazil and reports a lot for a lot of great independent websites, including Brazil Wire, friends of the show, the best English language reporting on Brazil. That's Brazil, like the Portuguese and Spanish spelling, BrazilWire.com. And Nathália also contributes to several other websites inside Brazil. And we have her on today to talk about the chaos that's going on inside Brazil. You know, the US, we've talked about in the past few episodes, has been the epicenter of the international COVID-19 pandemic. But quickly, Brazil is becoming the new epicenter. It has one of the worst coronavirus outbreaks on earth, and the far-right government, the fascistic government of Jair Bolsonaro, has basically done very little to nothing to deal with this massive pandemic, which is now probably the worst in Latin America, although it's competing with Ecuador, with the U.S. puppet regime there of Lenin Moreno, for having the honor, the great honor of having one of the highest death rates of COVID-19 on the planet. So we're going to talk about what the situation has been, of course, with coronavirus, but actually the larger political situation, because this chaos that Brazilians are living through right now is a political chaos, the result of the Bolsonaro government. We've talked in past episodes here at Moderate Rebels about how the Bolsonaro government came to power through a U.S. government-backed soft coup against the Workers' Party, the democratically elected government of Dilma Rousseff, and also the former president Lula da Silva. So there's a lot of topics we're going to talk about today, but Nathália, can we just start talking about what the situation is like now politically? Because we've seen over the past few weeks, first with the crisis in the Amazon, with the fires. I mean, that's been going on for months, and largely the Brazilian government has played a role. Bolsonaro encouraged all of these companies to destroy the Amazon rainforest, and the deforestation that he's overseen has led to these massive fires. And we saw that recently the Bolsonaro government allowed the military to oversee the Amazon policy, so kind of outsourcing official government policy to the military. And then we've also seen, basically in the past few weeks with this pandemic, it looks like the military has effectively taken control and kind of stripped Bolsonaro of his powers. So, you know, there's a lot to respond to there. That's a very broad intro, but maybe can you just start responding to what's been happening politically with the military inside Brazil?
Well, a lot. Basically, the military is in power in every ministry. They are overseeing everything in Brazil right now. Like, not just the Amazon, but for example, now the new Minister of Health in Brazil is a military, a general. Even though we have many generals who are medical doctors, this one is not. He has a degree in logistics. And
Nathália, sorry to cut you off already, but if I'm not mistaken, haven't there been two other health ministers that have been resigned or fired in just over a month and a half?
Yes. It is like Bolsonaro used to say, it is a technical job. So he needs someone that was technical. So the first two were doctors as well, but they did not comply with Bolsonaro's demand of saying that the pandemic could be solved with people having the hydroxychloroquine and just doing the vertical isolation, or just to put the elderly away and let the economy run as usual. So they did not comply with his demands, so they quit. One was fired, and the second one he stayed just 1 month in the job, and he quit as well. basically Bolsonaro now has this military and he's not a doctor, and he is changing the whole ministry and putting other militaries on jobs, and they are also not doctors. So in the middle of a pandemic, we have the Ministry of Health being in the control of people who are not in the health, they are not health professionals. So it is absurd. The situation with the Amazon, it's a bit more complicated now, especially since the release of the video showing the ministerial meeting that Bolsonaro had in March, when Moro and the second Minister of Health were still in their functions, where they said that they were using the pandemic as a distraction to approve legislation that would destroy the environment quickly in Brazil. Like, not just the environment, but archaeology sites and indigenous lands. They were like saying, we have to use the opportunity. They use the word opportunity, that the media is distracted, to push our legislations to the front, to get our jobs done here, because they won't know what we are doing, and we can destroy everything freely without being held in contempt for our wrongdoings. So it was very traumatic to actually hear them saying those words, because we always knew that these were their plan since the beginning. But when we see that it's actually their plan, and they are putting their plan in action, and no one is doing anything to stop them, it's very complicated. It's very sad, especially because even though we have a pandemic as well, the Amazon, the destruction of the Amazon this year is worse than last year, with the fires and everything. So, and also the people who are destroying the Amazon, the lumberjacks, the miners, etc., they brought the COVID-19 to the indigenous populations there, and they are also being highly affected. And because Bolsonaro kicked out all the Cuban doctors who are doing a tremendous, amazing work, bringing healthcare to distant communities, they are dying without any access to healthcare whatsoever. So it's basically a genocidal plan, a perfect genocidal plan.
Donald Trump is, or sorry, Jair Bolsonaro has been compared in this country to Donald Trump. They say he's, the South American Donald Trump. Steve Bannon, who was Donald Trump's campaign manager and for a while his chief of staff, has this fascist international organization. And I think Eduardo Bolsonaro is the Latin American director. Eduardo Bolsonaro is the son of Jair Bolsonaro. He's basically like juiced up, version of Netanyahu's nerd son, Yair. And they clear space for their dad to be more extreme and so on. But, Trump is so well associated with Bolsonaro, and he's done a lot to legitimize him. You have other forces in Washington that have legitimized Bolsonaro on the bipartisan side. The Council of the Americas, for example, this bipartisan think tank. It's actually run by Democrats, but they support the right in Latin America on behalf of big finance. But now you have this sort of cataclysmic event where the Trump administration cuts off travel from Brazil and basically declares that Bolsonaro has failed, that he's failed his country. The legitimacy that Bolsonaro had on the right is stripping away here. And I wonder what you think the effect of this will be domestically. And if you have any, conspiracy theories to offer on, what
Actually,
contributed to it,
it's not a conspiracy, it's actually
or
a fact.
conspiracy facts. We deal in
Yes, a
conspiracy
Yeah.
conspiracy
facts.
fact
Strictly
is
conspiracy
that
facts.
one of the person that is behind Bolsonaro's digital militia, and who's also used to work for the United States Embassy in Brazil, Felipe G. Martins. When the White House officially announced the travel ban, he created a whole story like to justify why they were doing that. But it was not because of Bolsonaro was failing to control the pandemic. No, it was just because Brazil is a very huge country and it's highly populated. So it was a measure of like the quantity of people of Brazil that travel a lot to the United States. So they were trying to protect not just the Brazilians, but also the United States because of the amount of travelers among both countries. The problem was not the government, it's just a mathematic question. So it was very funny, especially because Felipe G. Martins, he's the person that was the responsible for introducing Steve Bannon to Bolsonaro. He's the big link behind all the digital militia that unfortunately now it's not the biggest concern for us anymore, because the digital militia in Brazil became a real militia. The amount of far-right groups that are being radicalized in Brazil now, it's beyond any study that there is in Brazil in the last 30 years or so, since the redemocratization of the country. So when we see a country that now has a president that said we need to arm people to protect, because the people who are armed, they can defend themselves against fascist governors, like, for example, the São Paulo governor and the Rio de Janeiro governor, who are people, they are not nice, they are terrible politicians, they are also neoliberal fascist monsters, but they were inducing the people to social isolation. And Bolsonaro considered that measure a fascist one, because they are taking the freedom of the people to come and go. And this is against our constitution. So Bolsonaro said, that's why I want to give people guns, because they can defend themselves against those governors who are taking their freedom away. So basically, we have a president that is stimulating its own people to declare a civil war.
Yeah, and Nathália, I'm glad you brought this up, because I was going to ask you about the growth of these fascist militias. Of course, we don't have time to get into the entire history, but we need to stress the context that after World War II, and even during the Holocaust and before World War II, there were a lot of Nazi collaborators and fascists who came to Brazil. Brazil had a series of military dictatorships, including pro-fascist, pro-Nazi military dictatorships. So there's a long historical subtext, but we've seen under Bolsonaro the massive increase, the huge surge in these fascist militias. And I'm looking at a tweet here from Oliver Stunkel, who is a prominent kind of neoliberal elite voice in Brazil, who writes a column for El País, the major Spanish newspaper, and also works a lot with ASCOA, the Americas Society and Council of the Americas, which is, Max mentioned them. They're this U.S. government-linked kind of think tank that's really a vehicle for Washington's interest in Latin America, and also just corporate interests in Latin America. And anyway, Oliver Stunkel, this professor, he's been tweeting basically defending Bolsonaro's call for militarizing the population and creating these militias. And how is he doing it? He's pointing out that Hugo Chavez and the Chavista government in Venezuela created a popular militia. Of course, what is not being acknowledged is that the popular militia in Venezuela, which is a volunteer militia which now has 3 million members, is under the jurisdiction of the government. These are not paramilitaries that are just gangs of people who kind of control different neighborhoods like drug lords. I mean, this is an institution that's part of the state, and there are volunteer members who are part of the militia who want to defend their country from a foreign invasion, which would be by the US. So, of course, the context in Venezuela is totally different, but Bolsonaro is once again pointing toward Venezuela to justify these fascistic policies.
I saw a few days ago a Bolsonaro supporter, not sure if he was a real person or just a robot, showing a picture of the Kentucky State House with the militia in front of the Kentucky State House, holding guns and the American flag, and saying that they were tired of the lockdown, that they want to work. They were like threatening the state governor there. And when I saw that, and when the comment of the person who tweeted that picture was, "We need this here." And the most incredible thing in Brazil now, I don't know if you ever saw the expression, "We need to Ukrainize Brazil." Brazil, yes,
Who said that?
Brazil. Sarah Winter. I don't really know her real last name, but let me just finish the thought of the Ukrainized Brazil. So there is now many anthropologists. She did a research which shows that there are 334 neo-Nazi groups active in Brazil right now. Among those groups, there are KKK groups, German neo-Nazi factions, regular sectarian groups, and they have a battalion Azov point in Brazil, affiliated group in Brazil as well.
For listeners who don't know, the Azov Battalion is a neo-Nazi, explicitly white supremacist militia in Ukraine. It played a key role in the 2014 coup against the Russian-oriented elected government, and it's also been backed by the Ukrainian state. It was merged into the Ukrainian National Guard and is backed by the US government. So Nathália, you're saying that among the over 300 different neo-Nazi militias in Brazil, there is officially a Ukrainian neo-Nazi faction.
No, we have many Ukraine neo-Nazi factions in Brazil right now, which it's really bizarre. And that girl,
we call them moderate rebels.
Yeah. Also, you gotta say, man, Latin American racism is so crazy because this is a country
crazy, right?
where to white supremacists in the US, none of these people would be considered white, or very few of them would be considered white. But in Brazil, they all like, yeah, we're white and we hate black and brown people.
This is why we have to register Hezbollah in Brazil as a terrorist organization too. That's why it's so important.
Exactly.
And when the group, what they are doing now, when the lockdown talk started to come up in Brazil, Sarah Winter, who she used to be the feminist Ukrainian group representative in Brazil. But she said that after she converted to as a Christian and she had contact with the true conservadorism, she's now a newborn person. But she did had some training in Ukraine. And now she has a camp in Brazilian, which she is giving away the training that she received in Ukraine from I don't know what group she had the training there, because I did even knew that Femen had a military training originally in Ukraine. She just said, I had a training in Ukraine. And she started to use a hashtag on Twitter that was followed by many elected members of the Congress. That is Ucraniza Brazil, Ukrainize Brazil. Like they are asking for Brazil to get inspiration from the nationalist groups from Ukraine and do the same that they did there in Brazil.
So, the digital militia we've talked about before in a previous episode. When we interviewed our friend Alina Piva, who explained to us one of the reasons why Bolsonaro was able to sort of spread his message of extremism, and it was really this fake news brigade that conveyed various memes and narratives through WhatsApp, including that the Workers' Party was going to indoctrinate children into sucking penis-shaped pacifiers, that kind of just stuff that you would find ridiculous. But it fell on fertile soil, particularly among the evangelical base of Bolsonaro, which I think, it stands apart from the military in many ways. This is sort of a popular grassroots base. One of the things that I've been reading about is the rise of evangelical or Pentecostal right-wing militias that attack temples of people who practice traditional African religion. So it's sort of a way of just attacking black people, burning their places of worship. Can you address that and what these militias are actually doing?
They are called the Jesus drug lords.
Yeah, they raise money through drug gangs.
They sell drugs. They are drug traffickers. They sell drugs, and they are also evangelical. So they have their regular criminal activities, but they also do the whole harassment against the traditional Afro-Brazilian religions. They are very strong and they are very rooted in the culture of the favelas, especially in Rio. And when they were caught by the police, they said that they were being indoctrinated by pastors inside jails. Many years ago, during the 19th, for example, the jails had many democratical groups. And among those groups, one of it used to be a very strong group was the ones who worshipped the Afro-Brazilian deities. But nowadays, even inside jails, the criminal factions, they are all Christians. So they are not allowing those people to worship their religion anymore. And when we have a government that is also praising the hate to be spread, praising the diminish of the iconography of the Afro influences in the Brazilian culture, it's not a surprise to see that when something like that came out to the media, it was treated like a joke, like, oh, they are Christian drug dealers. Like, yes, but they are killing people and taking down their worship houses. And basically what what Bolsonaro's made to address the issue was to make even worse. He put in charge of the biggest Black culture foundation in Brazil a man who basically hates everything that is related to Black culture in general, because he said that his soul does not have a color. So he's erasing. Bolsonaro is giving the country a valuable reason to erase everything that is African Brazilian. Just like they are doing the same thing with the indigenous Brazilian culture as well. He's exchanging everything to be his evangelical neo-Pentecostal culture there. Like, for example, during the meeting, the Minister of Human Rights, who is a evangelical pastor, she said, I am concerned with the children who are born among the travelers, among the Maroons, among indigenous, because the children there, they have their culture. They do not have our culture. So they do have a ethnocide plan to erase all the cultures, and just because in their minds, the real culture, the Brazilian culture, is the Christian, militarized, neo-Pentecostal culture, and that's it. And Zionist as well, of course.
Yeah, and this is really crazy. I mean, a lot of our listeners and viewers are in the U.S. I mean, other countries too, but I think mostly the U.S. And I think a lot of people tend to think of this white supremacist ideology in the context of the U.S., where only around 14% of the population is black. But in Brazil, about over half of the population, I mean, not a huge majority, but a majority of the population is of African descent, right?
Yes. But the thing is, it's race is still a touchy subject in Brazil. Like, we have Bolsonaro Bolsonaro was the first president to be endorsed by someone like David Duke.
And well, he endorses everybody. I mean,
I mean, Latin America, in Brazil, I don't remember having someone like David Duke endorsing anyone like Bolsonaro, like in Brazil before Bolsonaro. I don't know if he ever did this before.
Well, yeah, it said that I was endorsed by David Duke too. So I mean, it's a good way for David Duke to get publicity. But I get what you're saying.
He also just trolls people by fake endorsing them. But in this, and then people say, "Oh, you were endorsed by David Duke," like what happened with Tulsi Gabbard. But in this case, I think you're right.
I have this conspiracy theory that David Duke is paid by neoconservative and centrist elements to endorse things that they don't want to win. But in any case, no, your point is well taken, and I think the Bannon connection is much more salient. African culture in Brazil is a culture of resistance going back to the quilombos, these communities of freed slaves who actually, militarized.
That according Bolsonaro, they are useless. They just stand there eating, and he compared them to farm animals. Yeah. During a speech he gave in the Israeli club in São Paulo.
At the Israeli club. And that's, another component. But, there's this history of counterinsurgency in Brazil of inserting neo-Pentecostal ideology dating back to the 70s. And actually, Brazil Wire has a really important series. There's, some journalism that's been done on it, but basically the Rockefeller brothers, through their foundation, working with the State Department, worked with the World Church of the Creator to bring, to project evangelical Christianity into the Amazon in order to enable business interests to take over, to root out the indigenous religion. And now, you can see them rooting out the African culture of resistance, even in prisons, working through pastors. So, I mean, this seems to be an extension of destroying the popular base of, the Workers' Party, but also in general of resisting the right and the oligarchy in Brazil.
And the strangest thing is that, for example, the biggest church in Brazil is the Universal Church of the Kingdom of God.
That's what I was referring to. Yeah, the Universal Church.
Bispo Edir Macedo. And Bispo Edir Macedo used to endorse Lula in the past.
Really?
And yes, he used to endorse Lula. He used to endorse the Workers' Party. And when Lula started to entering in gender and religion and human rights subjects, the church had a breach with the Workers' Party. Like, they started to disagree with each other. Like when Lula authorized the civil union among people of the same gender and things like that. And when Lula has the ability, the humility to say the left in Brazil needs to come closer to evangelicals, because the evangelicals, they are the poorest in Brazil. So while the left, they are just offering their campaign to people who are like in universities and unions, etc. The church and the far right are doing the campaigns in the favelas and the inner city areas.
This is interesting to me, just a really quick note, because in Nicaragua, the population is becoming more and more evangelical here. And it used to be a very Catholic country, but the Catholic Church is so associated with the right wing. The Catholic Church played a key role in the very violent U.S.-backed coup attempt in 2018. But that's not new. I mean, going back many years, there has been a rising evangelical movement, and the movement is pretty split between far-right evangelicals who are diehard anti-Sandinistas, but then also there's a significant base of pro-Sandinista evangelicals, including some of the most dedicated members of the Sandinista Front, supporters of the leftist government. I mean, it's different here. It's a very different context, but as evangelical Christianity is rising throughout the region, I mean, I think, it's objectively true that the U.S. and some of these billionaire-funded foundations have for decades tried to weaponize evangelical Christianity, and to some degree of success they have succeeded. But I think in some ways there have also been kind of new forms of evangelical Christianity that merged out of that are more progressive.
I think the difference in Brazil, at least, is that the Catholic Church, yes, they have the right-wing conservative components, but they also have huge famous figures who are members of the theology of liberation, and they are still in activity. In São Paulo, we have people like Padre Júlio Lancelotti. He's doing an amazing work feeding homeless people with the Islamic leader of a mosque, in the São Paulo mosque, and with evangelical pastors as well. He's a very, he brings all the progressive leaderships together, but he's a Catholic priest. We also have many pastors in Brazil from smaller churches, or even from traditional churches like Baptist and Presbyterian and Protestants in general, who are also against Bolsonaro. But the new Pentecostal movement, people like the Assembly of God, the Universal Church of Kingdom of God, wherever, they are all very much pro-Bolsonaro, because Bolsonaro promised them things and he's giving them those things. For example, the mayor of Rio de Janeiro, is the nephew of Bishop Edir Macedo from the Universal Church, and the townhouse gave a Rocinha, a favela, some medical equipment to put in their medical center there. What the mayor and also pastor from the church said, no, don't let your equipment in this shoddy hospital. Let's put the equipment inside our church. That way he would bring people inside his church and convert the people, and also give the church an excuse to be a part of the government as well. It's a very strange situation, because Brazil is becoming more and more like a theocracy. And Bolsonaro is not shy. He's not trying to hide that his plan is to make Brazil a theocracy. He said, I am a Christian president and we are a Christian country, when as actually it's not a Christian country. There are several other faiths there as well. And he said, when people voted for me, they were voting for my flags. And my flags are conservadorism, Christianity, gun possession, and he said free market. I don't know why, but he said free market.
Well, and as we saw in a recent march, his flags are also the U.S. flag and the Israeli flag.
Exactly. It's very strange. I really don't understand how come a nationalist, like he said he is a nationalist, is always like waving other countries' flag. It does not make sense at all. And and now other people in Brazil, we are noticing since the Ukrainization movement, they are also waving the Ukraine flag as well.
Perfect. So all the far-right Bolsonaro supporters are waving the U.S. flag, the Israeli flag, and the Ukrainian flag. So the international flag representing the U.S. empire and white supremacy, the flag representing Zionist colonialism, and the flag representing a neo-Nazi infused Ukrainian regime, and they don't see any What's great is that they don't see any contradictions between those. Only like liberals who believe in like they believe that the U.S. represents democracy and Israel is a democracy. Only they would see the contradiction, think that there's a contradiction there.
But what the strangest thing of Bolsonaro is that now we are seeing people that were elected because of him, and they are now like trying to get aside, like they are not supporting, they are openly criticizing Bolsonaro, saying, well, it was a shocker to have his actions are a shocker. No, they are not shocker. They are exactly what we thought it would be. He's acting, he is very coherent through his history, actually, because he's someone that was a obscure member of the Congress, who did not have a good grip of how laws actually work. He does everything to protect his family, like using Brazil as his own personal keeping up with the Kardashians type of government. And he's also someone that is extremely prejudicial against anything that is not white, Christian, and rich. So, and he's very coherent in his actions. And now we are seeing a country that people are, yesterday, more people died in Brazil than in the United States.
Right.
And
today is May 26th, so that on the 25th.
Sorry, it was on Monday, on May 25, 800 people died in Brazil. And when we have, and his response to everything like that is put his lackeys to throw away some fake news. Like they are burying empty caskets. They are like digging graves that will be empty in the end of everything. And the economy can stop because we are a poor country. And now everything that the government was like, not giving, but the help that they offered to people, it will be canceled because they said we can give money, free money to the people because they won't be wanting to work later on because they are having free money. The economy needs to open up. We need to, people will die, but what are some people? And people and the world is watching, and somehow, especially the international media, I feel that many are using all the crisis Brazil is going through, all the deaths, all the misery, and they are using as a clickbait for a government that they helped to put there, that they helped to elect. Same as the Brazilian media. the Brazilian media spends like the last decade demonizing the Workers' Party. And now they are like making a whole show saying we can work like covering the Bolsonaro's the presidential residence anymore because Bolsonaro is throwing his supporters on us and they are feeling physically unsafe to be there. But at the same time, they are still making horrible comparisons between Bolsonaro and Lula.
Right. Right. They're saying they're both sort of equally fascist. Or...
Yes. They are they say they are like it's really hard to explain.
Because Hitler was a national socialist, so...
Yeah, and the strategy is they say all populists are the same. So, which is a meaningless term, a populist. So, if you're like a fascistic far-right populist or a left-wing populist, it was the same thing people did with Bernie Sanders and Trump. They're all the same because they're not part of the neoliberal center.
They are the same characters of the same in the game. So
because they criticize the media. And if you criticize the media, it's because you're an enemy of democracy.
But the thing is, Lula criticized the media, but he never like said to anyone like, go ahead and like let's kill some journalists. Like Bolsonaro, he is saying that. He's pushing people towards violence. And they are still today one of the biggest newspapers in Brazil. They wrote an editorial saying that Bolsonaro is here because Lula came first and he brought the radicalization from the insides of the Brazilian people. It was like very ridiculous. It was very disrespectful. And they are still insisting in, even though they are like being physically threatened, they are still insisting in comparing two very different politicians.
Well, wasn't it the centrist Democrat from Washington, Joe Biden, who went to Brazil to bless the coup against Dilma Rousseff? I mean, you could draw a pretty clear line between the Obama administration and the rise of Bolsonaro. Just they launched that parliamentary coup, and now you have a situation where I wonder if there are sort of, I don't want to call them centrist elements, but, the Trump administration would call them the deep state, but, entrenched interests in Washington and Brazil trying to pull the country back from the brink as the rule of law kind of collapses. You saw leaked video, I guess, or it wasn't leaked, it was released by, I think, a Brazilian judge of a ministerial meeting.
Yes, the ministerial meeting.
I think this was this week, in which Bolsonaro is ranting about shutting down an investigation into his family, his brother-in-law, by Sergio Moro. Sergio Moro was the justice minister, who's one of the super ministers who helped coordinate with the U.S. To put Lula da Silva in jail. And now Moro has resigned, I think, as a result of, at least over what he claims is that he's resigning because Bolsonaro has, tried to block this investigation into his family. But it also seems like Moro is sort of the CIA candidate. It seems like he's the person that Washington wants to run the country. He would be a much better steward of neoliberalism than a wild card like Bolsonaro. Am I getting off track here?
No, it's correct. I spoke about that last weekend in Brazil, that there are two factions. There are the faction of Moro, that is the faction from Curitiba, who is a very conservative neoliberal, they have a very strong neoliberal tradition in the south of Brazil, where Lula was arrested and stayed in jail there. And there is the faction of the militias from Rio with Bolsonaro. And Moro, he's not the best public figure like Bolsonaro, because Bolsonaro is a wild card, but he brings all the nut jobs with him. Moro, he does not have a public persona like Bolsonaro.
Bolsonaro is charismatic. I mean, he is dumb. He is a fascist, but he's charismatic. He's entertaining, like Trump, and you can watch him, and people are drawn to him. And Moro is like cardboard.
Yes, exactly. And we see that Bolsonaro, he's useful for the Trump government. I'm not even saying the Republicans, but Trump government, because he will do literally anything Trump wants, like anything, name it, and he will do. While Sergio Moro, he thinks about the future more than Bolsonaro. So like today, Brazil Wire published an article, originally published in Portuguese by Agência Pública, showing that Moro has been, in the time he was the Minister of Justice, that he was constantly meeting with FBI agents. And they were like together, they were like making the strategy, the program of biometrics in Brazil. And it's very interesting because Moro, during his first trip with Bolsonaro to the United States, both were invited to the headquarters of the CIA, which is very unusual for a former leader to be invited to a headquarters. And
I mean, they were giving away the game, because it wasn't just, I mean, to stress the importance of this, this was Bolsonaro's first ever trip to the U.S. as the president of Brazil, and he immediately visited CIA headquarters. But they were giving away the game because it wasn't just Bolsonaro. It was also Sergio Moro who went with him to CIA headquarters. And it's one thing, it's bad enough, it's an awful look for the head of a foreign, ostensibly sovereign country to visit CIA headquarters. But why is his super justice minister visiting with him? And of course, the answer is what many Brazilian leftists had been speculating for many years, that it's very clear that Moro had been working with the CIA and with other U.S. intelligence agents and the FBI, we now know,
to arrest Lula. Because during their meetings, the documents the Agência Pública had access were showing that the FBI said they were annoyed by Lula's reluctance and denial of making groups and political parties like Hezbollah and Hamas be considered terrorist group in Brazil as well, like they do in all the countries that they have some power. And Lula said, no, we won't do what you are asking. So they seemed very annoyed by this in the documents. And it was mentioned that by Moro. And one of the first things that Brazil did, the country, when Bolsonaro came to office, was to consider those groups that United States consider as terrorist group a terrorist as well.
We have a piece up at the Gray Zone now by Daniel Jejic on the registration by the German government 2 weeks ago, I guess, of Hezbollah as a terrorist organization. This is a political party, one of the main political parties in Lebanon that's in parliament and in a coalition government. So it would be, it's basically about advancing U.S. and Israeli foreign policy from Latin America. It has almost nothing to do with any reality in Brazil. Colombia
the person who brought the idea of like Hezbollah and Hamas doing anything in Latin America was Roger Noriega, who worked with Bush administration.
Right,
and
Roger Noriega
yeah. He was also the biggest cheerleader of the coup that removed Dilma from power.
This is, in the they call it, the triangle, or like this area where there are several borders, and Roger Noriega is one of the biggest fanatics in Washington. He was sitting behind me at a Council of the Americas event, And after I asked a critical question of the director of USAID about why they were funding violent elements in Nicaragua, he started taking all these pictures of the back of my head, showing that I have male pattern baldness, or I don't know what. Noriega's bald. And then he just screamed at me after the event. I'm like, who is this crazy guy screaming at me? And I realized it was Roger Noriega, someone who's been behind, every coup, involved in every coup plot since the Bush administration from 2002 in Venezuela. He even afterwards tried to stir up a coup or some kind of activity in Cuba in 2014. So it makes perfect sense. It's about delegitimizing the left governments and saying that they're harboring terrorists in their midst. After Netanyahu had a call with Ivan Duque last week, Colombia has also declared Hezbollah a terrorist organization. So yeah, it all makes perfect sense. It's all kind of come together. I wanted to ask about a related incident that has to do with U.S. planning. It's pretty clear to me, it makes perfect sense that this Silver Corps mercenary organization that recently organized the Bay of Piglets in Venezuela, or the Bay of Guinea Pigs, whatever you want to call it, this absurdly bungled invasion of Venezuela with or Venezuelan defectors, turncoats, who are poorly armed, that they couldn't have gotten all those weapons and training camps into Colombia without at least the express permission and if not just the knowledge of the Colombian government. But these guys were in Brazil in 2018 as Operation Gideon, their plan to invade Venezuela, was underway. What was their connection with Bolsonaro? What was going on there?
Well, they were in Brazil. I was the one that actually found out they were in Brazil. They were in Brazil in the week that the elections were about to happen there, the presidential elections.
Yeah. What could have been the reason?
My take on this is Bolsonaro, he was very, very strong-worded through the end of his campaign. That he did not make a campaign because of the stabbing and he was at the hospital, etc. But he gave an interview saying, I will not accept a result that is not me winning, or at least me being the most voted candidate. So when the reporter asked, so are you saying you won't believe the result of the election? Because this is a very thing to say in a country that spent 30 years or so in a dictatorship. And he said, no, I know that people in the streets want me. So any result that is unfavorable to me, it will have a response. So my take on this is Bolsonaro, through his contacts in the United States, he had the mercenaries, the American mercenaries in Brazil, waiting in case of the results were like he was not like his performance in the elections were not by his like, and they would start the same way they wanted to start the fomented a coup in Venezuela, whatever, they would do the same in Brazil, same way they did in Bolivia. But because Bolsonaro performed tremendously well in the first turn of the elections, they left the country just around a few days before the second round of votes, because we all knew after the first round of votes that Haddad would not be able to surpass Bolsonaro. So they knew that as well, but they were there.
And consistent with that theory is the contract they signed with Juan Guaido and his advisors. We have an analysis of that contract up at the Gray Zone by Alan McLeod. And one of the points that I think a lot of the mainstream media missed, even that published the contract, it was first in the Washington Post, the full text of it, was that Silver Corps had been authorized to eliminate colectivos, to basically carry out death squad activities of the base of the Chavista movement, of the base of Nicolas Maduro. So, you know, if they're going and touting their ability to do that in Venezuela, why not in Brazil, in the favelas or something?
I don't think in case in Brazil, like the movements in Brazil that are more pro-leftist movements, they are like faithful to Lula and to the Workers' Party. They are mostly on the countryside. They are farmers' movement, like the landless movement and things like that. They are like field workers' movement. So they are not violent at all. Actually, they are extremely peaceful movement. There have been through the years many accusations that they have a military training, that they are a parallel army or something like that from the Workers' Party, but they are actually always a target from farmers, from even the military police in Brazil. They are extremely peaceful movement. It's a movement formed by families, children, women, old people. So I think they would be the target in Brazil because they are extremely loyal to Lula, because Lula was the first to speak about the land issues in Brazil.
Right, and the colectivos are just identified in Venezuela as, you know, they're conflated with just working class people or Afro-Venezuelans and
Or anyone
poor,
riding
the
a
poor.
motorcycle specifically, which would be
Yeah.
poor people who don't have a car.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, whenever there's an article about them in the U.S. media or Vice does something about them, they just show Venezuelans on motorcycles, which you can kind of see everywhere. I don't know. We're an hour in, Ben. You want to?
Yeah, a few more questions. And another thing that the Brazil Wire article pointed out on Silvercore is that they listed on their website that one of the specialties they have is psychological operations. So that's another hint as to what they could have been doing in Brazil. But
Well, these guys need psychological operations. They're some
Exactly.
of the dumbest. I mean, I don't even know if they have. Anyway.
Yeah, yeah. I'm gonna hire the guy who's so dumb he tweets about the operation, and then posts shirtless photos all over his professional website. But anyway,
Some
there's
13-dimensional chess right there.
exactly. It's all like it's double psychology, it's triple psychology. But Nathália, there's another related issue here, and that's also the role of Brazil in the Bolsonaro government in the coup attempt, the constant ongoing coup attempts against the Chavista government in Venezuela. There was one huge scandal. I mean, I know there have been other scandals, but there was a huge scandal inside Brazil this January that got some coverage in the Brazilian media, but got and some in the Spanish language, Latin American media, mostly Telesur, but it got no coverage in English. We reported on it at the Gray Zone. I wrote a piece about how there was a series of terror attacks that were being planned called trilogy, and of the 3 planned terror attacks, 2 of them didn't go through. They ended up falling apart. They were botched, like the botched operation by Silvercore. But there was an attempted terror attack that was launched from Brazilian territory across the border into Venezuela, the eastern border of Venezuela. And they did attack a Venezuelan military base. And this was acknowledged by O Globo. O Globo is, for viewers who don't know, one of the biggest newspapers in Brazil. It's also owned by right-wing oligarchs, so they're certainly not sympathetic at all to Venezuela. But even they acknowledged that the Brazilian government was involved in a terror attack on its neighbor, Venezuela. What else do we know about the Bolsonaro government's involvement in the U.S.-led kind of far-right coup attempt against Venezuela? We've talked about Colombia's role, but I don't think Brazil's role is as discussed.
Well, Bolsonaro has been harboring all the terrorists that are attacking Venezuela and seeking refuge in Brazil. He gave asylum to I don't remember if it's 2 or 3 militaries that ran after the attack of a military base in Venezuela. They tried to ransack the base, and they tried to run after they were caught. They tried to run with the guns, with their weapons to Brazil, but they were they arrived there without any weapons at all. And Bolsonaro gave them the asylum. And the most, so far, the biggest demonstration was when Guaido type of supporters, aka a gang, tried to invade the Venezuela embassy in Brasilia. This was very big because we had members of our Congress using their bodies. They were like physically fighting Guaido's supporters and not letting them inside the embassy to protect the Venezuelans and the Maduro's people there.
Well,
we had people.
Max knows something about being beaten up by fascist thugs while trying to protect Venezuela's sovereign embassy in a foreign country.
And it was very funny because they were like wearing like suits and everything, and they were like punching people. There are like pictures of them punching people, and you're not gonna come here. And they are like members of the Congress. And it was the day that BRICS meeting in Brazil was about to start. So because Putin was coming, because the China government was coming, Bolsonaro was very afraid of that. And when his son Eduardo tweeted saying that there are some communist members of our Congress that beated the Venezuelan people trying to get their embassy back, Bolsonaro asked his son to delete those tweets because he was literally afraid of the repercussion this could bring when he was to face Putin and Xi Jinping.
Right.
This is actually a perfect segue to conclude here, Nathália, because I was going to ask you about BRICS. Great segue. During
the ministerial meeting, it's very interesting that some parts were redacted, and the parts that were redacted were parts about China, when they made several racist comments on China. But it was very poorly redacted, so of course we could hear the comments saying that China has the obligation to launch a new Marshall program for the world because they were the ones who spread the virus. They also said that if it were up to them, they would not be in business with China because they are forced to be in business with China, but they don't like Chinese at all. They use those exact words. So this is very serious.
Well, if they want China to launch a new Marshall program, they can support the Belt and Road Initiative because that's what it is. But I was going to ask, if Bolsonaro had been pointing the finger at China the way Trump is here.
Well, not like Trump, but members of his government, they are saying many racist things all the time about China. And they are also, after the meeting, the person who said he did not wanted to be in business with China is the Minister of Economy, the Chicago boy, Paulo Guedes. And so now the embassy of China said they will study what to do next. So people in Brazil think this means some sanctions, some more difficulties through the agribusiness sector because China was the main buyer of Brazil's soya, Brazil's grains, etc. So this will not be a good thing for all the agro sector who supported Bolsonaro.
Right.
And I was going to ask about the BRICS system in China because we saw during Bolsonaro's presidential campaign, he had extremely aggressive anti-China rhetoric. Like Trump, and it foreshadowed the Cold War we're living through now. I mean, this has been happening for many years. Of course, the Hillary Clinton State Department and the Obama administration was the one that declared the so-called pivot to Asia, which was part of the attempt to encircle China, the strategy to balkanize China. So this has been coming for many years, but Bolsonaro was one of the most vocal anti-China hawks back in 2017 and 2018. I remember reading articles where he gave speeches declaring that China has invaded Brazil. He complained that China was buying Brazil, buying up the country. And of course, when he became president, dealing with the exigencies of being president, the physical reality of power, he kind of softened some of that criticism. But we've definitely seen that Brazil under Bolsonaro has taken a very strong turn away from China and more into the arms of the US. And another institution that we've seen that in is the BRICS system. That, for listeners who don't know, that stands for Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. When Lula and Dilma Rousseff were in power, at the peak of the height of the pink tide in the region, there were so many of these efforts to build international institutions to challenge the hegemony of the US, to challenge the World Bank and the IMF. The BRIC system was one of those institutions. But since the soft coup that ousted the Workers' Party, and we had Michel Temer, who was a total neoliberal, and then now, of course, Bolsonaro, we've seen that the BRIC system, I mean, it seems extremely weak. What does it even do anymore? So this is kind of an open-ended question to kind of end on here, but looking forward, what do you think that Brazil's policy will be going forward with BRICS and with China? Do you think that Bolsonaro will continue pushing hard against China, or will he maintain this kind of softer stance? And do you think that he'll just destroy BRICS?
It has been reported by some media outlets in Brazil that Trump has a memo that he will send, or he's already sent to his mate countries, saying that they all should adopt the anti-China rhetoric and also avoid business with China and try to find other business partners. And the terms of the memo are not disclosed, like if he's going to be like sending money, if he will offer the business, because a few weeks ago, China stopped a big purchase of soya from Brazil. Instead, they purchased from United States. So we don't know how...
Brazil purchased from the US instead of China.
No, the contrary. China supposed to buy from Brazil the soy grains. Instead, they bought from United States.
Interesting.
And it was a week later after the Minister of Education posted a very racist figure about China on Twitter. And he was forced to apologize it, even though it was not an apology. He said, "Oh, I'm sorry if you feel offended." But we are seeing that the rhetoric of hate, the anti-China, not just anti-Communist Party of China or anti the economical structure. No, it's a racist rhetoric against Chinese people in general and Asians in general. It has been promoted by members of the government. And Bolsonaro is being warned by it. He says, "I'm not the one doing it, but those close to him are the ones that are doing it." So it's basically like he was the one doing it.
And do you think BRICS will survive?
I don't know if BRICS will survive with Bolsonaro, with Brazil being a part of BRICS, but I think BRICS will survive as an institution, but not with Brazil having the leading part like used to have when Lula was the president of Brazil. Brazil will be a member there, but they will not do much with Brazil. The same is happening with Mercosul and other groups. Like Brazil is still a member, but they are not like doing much. Although I do believe that now Mercosul is kind of changing. Even the people from Lima group and everything, they are kind of changing their perspective of having Brazil as their ally, because Brazil became a diplomatic leprosy. It's a few minutes before we started our chat, I saw an exchange of a Twitter fight between Jorge Arreaza, the Minister of International Relations of Venezuela, and Ernesto Araújo, the President Chancellor. They were like fighting again, like he was saying something about like Venezuela being a dictatorship, like it was a totally gratuitous to a free offense. With the diplomatic body of Brazil now, it seems to be on their agenda when they are being like pushed by all sides. Like now, when all the international media is attacking Brazil, they try to diverge their attention attacking Venezuela.
Right.
So it is very pathetic. It's very unprofessional. It feels like we are stuck on a fifth grade classroom, because the decorum among politicians in Brazil is something that is not it's not even optional anymore. It does not exist. And when we have someone like Bolsonaro doing this kind of behaving the way like he does, people feel that they can behave the way they are behaving as well. So that's why we are having also, again, the surge of radicalized far-right groups in Brazil.
Sounds very familiar.
They are all feeling empowered. So it's very complicated.
Well, it sounds really encouraging. I'm really looking forward to the lockdown ending, to re-enter the brave new world. Ben, I don't know if you want to take us out here.
Yeah, absolutely. So you are listening to Moderate Rebels. We were speaking with Nathália Urban, who is a great Brazilian journalist. You can see her work on Twitter. Actually, do you want to just tell our listeners and viewers, Nathália, where people can find your work?
You can find my work in English in Brazil Wire, of course. Hopefully soon in more other outlets as well. I also write here in Scotland and podcast for Ungagged Scotland. In Brazil, I have articles published in Brasil 247. I'm now going to have my own space there, and I'm live, how can I say, a video living with them every Friday with them and
live
Brian
streaming every
Meir
Friday.
from Brazil Wire.
Excellent. And you can follow Nathália on Twitter, which I would recommend, at Urban Nathália, her name, so Urban Nathália. And thanks a lot, Nathália. That was a great conversation.
Thanks a lot. That was fantastic.
And unfortunately, with the situation in Brazil, I don't see it getting much better in the near future. So hopefully we can have you back to talk about all of the fascist madness going on. And for those who want to support the kind of reporting we do here in these interviews, please go to patreon.com/moderaterebels. Max and I rely on our Patreon to continue the independent work we do. So definitely please consider becoming a patron, and check us out at YouTube and Twitter at moderate_rebels. We'll be back soon to talk about more on the impact of coronavirus around the world. I'm Ben Norton with my co-host Max Blumenthal. As always, thanks for listening.